And then we started a series just last weekend called Unstuck. And here's what we recognize. We know that in life, as we're kind of moving along and kind of motoring through life, that we hit moments where we get kind of stuck and we get stagnant. And that stuckness, it kind of happens in relationships. It happens financially. It happens mentally, emotionally. It can even happen, of course, spiritually. And so we said, let's just take a handful of weeks and really stare at that conversation a little bit and ask the questions, what would it look like to get unstuck? How do we kind of see some inertia build? How do we rip the Band-Aid and see things move forward? And we said, what if we just took some time to stare at that? And we recognized, right, even starting last week, we talked about kind of getting unstuck physically with our bodies. We said we're probably going to have to do some things that are pretty uncomfortable, right? There's a reason we got stuck because we didn't want to square off with some things that maybe were difficult or a little bit painful or certainly uncomfortable. And so we said let's have those conversations, and if we started to rip some Band-Aids in our lives, would we see some momentum begin to build, some things move again? And as we kind of kick off a new year, we said, let's fire up those conversations and see if we get things going and watch God kind of work in and through us along the way. One of the verses that we looked at last week, wanted to bring it back for us this week. In John chapter 8, this is what Jesus said. He said, if you hold to my teachings, you really are my disciples. Then you'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And we're going to do this kind of each week. We're going to stare at reality and kind of revisit reality and see the truth. And the reality is when I don't see truth, when I'm disconnected from what really is happening, I kind of become a slave and become stuck in my own paradigm, and my world gets small. When I know truth and when I see reality, things open up again. Freedom happens, right? And that's one of the big reasons that God spoke to us, is that so we could have access to truth and reality, and so that things wouldn't be small and limiting and enslaving, that they would be freeing. And we said that's what we are looking for. That's what we want to see happen. We want to know the truth and see the truth really set us free. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a unique conversation around what it means kind of to be stuck spiritually. Right? What does it mean to be stuck spiritually? And for the sake of this conversation, I want to take us back to the basics and some of the realities, the kind of the core of what it is we believe. And I wanted to spend some time doing that because I think when we stare at that and see it for what it is, it just kind of unlocks the rest of the conversation. And for the sake of our conversation today, we're going to set up around a bit of a conversation around baptism. And I've told you guys this a bunch before. I didn't grow up in the church. And so most things about church were weird to me when I first started coming. I was like, why do people do all this weird stuff? I mean, this doesn't even make sense to me. And I remember when I said yes to Jesus, I was like, okay, I'm making this decision. And then people were like, you should get baptized. I was like, so you want me to go get in some water and let you dunk me in it? This doesn't make any sense, right, at all. Like, why would anyone do that? That doesn't make any sense to me, right? If you grew up in the church, you're like, yeah, that's just what you do. You get baptized. That's part of the conversation. If you're like me and you didn't grow up in the church, you're like, this is weird, right? I don't understand why anyone would want to do that. I don't understand the meaning of it. And so one of the things we have to do is this is what happened to me, is I said, hey, okay, help me understand the baptism thing a little bit more. And they're like, well, you should get baptized. Why? Well, Jesus told us to. I was like, well, that's a cool reason. Can you give me more? Like, is there anything else that's underneath that thing? And then often followers of Jesus would struggle at this point. Well, it's a symbol. Symbol of what? I don't know. Jesus just told us to. Just do it, right? And then the conversation would kind of stop. So I had to go kind of understand what the Bible actually said about baptism and see that this thing is so powerful. The picture of baptism is incredibly deep. It's so profound. It's a little mind-blowing. And so I want us to walk kind of walk into that picture, I want to ask you to kind of buckle up with me because we're going to go on a journey. It takes us kind of deep down into the truth and the reality of what Jesus did for us. But that symbol of what Jesus did is going to be kind of the focal point of what baptism is. A lot of times we talk about baptism like a wedding ring, right? Like a wedding ring. And we say this. We say, hey, a wedding ring is a symbol, right? If I could take mine off, I would take it off and show it to you, right? But this is it. When I stood kind of on the altar or whatever, right? When I stood up front and I looked at Lori and I declared to her, like, you're the woman for me, right? I'm with you. And she did that to me. We declared our vows to one another. And those vows would change our interactions with every other human being that we know. Change the way that we interact with our parents and our friends and everybody. And all of that changed. And then what the pastor would ask, he would ask, hey, what symbol do you have? What token do you have that represents these marriage vows? Right? And then I would say these rings. And then I pulled out rings. And now we know this, that packed within this simple ring, we all understand that means something. If somebody's got a ring on their finger, that means that they are no longer single, that they're off the market, that they're attached to another human being in a profound way. All of that's wrapped up there, right? And it's all symbolic of this deeper picture, this deeper reality, a deeper decision that we each made, that we made public in a marriage ceremony, right? Baptism is very, very similar to that picture, and we want to spend some time staring at the reality underneath baptism so that we can understand it a little bit better. Now, I need to set up shop here a little bit and kind of walk us through what this looks like and what it means. So the Bible, when it talks to us, it's going to assume some things, okay? Here's what I mean by that. The Bible is going to assume that we know some things about ourselves. The Bible is going to assume that we know that we have kind of a problem that we're sick of, right? And the Bible is going to call this problem sin. And sin is basic, right? It gets kind of overblown. And what I mean by that is sometimes in Christian culture, sin is viewed as something that like bad people do. Sin is something that everybody does, okay? And if you're not convinced of that, well, let's walk it through. Here's what it would look like. God would tell us, right, basically anything that breaks his law is sin. So you can ask yourself these questions. Have I ever looked lustfully at another person? Have I ever hated somebody in my heart? Have I ever used the Lord's name in vain? Right? And if you're still with me and you said no already, then you're probably a liar, which is another breaking of God's commandment, right? So now you're a sinner, right? This is just how it works. And so sin is something that's a part of all of our lives, but the Bible is going to assume that we view this in a certain lens, that we recognize that we are attached to sin and enslaved to sin. And the Bible is going to say, hey, for the person that says, I want salvation, I want to be saved from this, that person is saying, I'm sick of this. I don't want to be like this anymore. Like, can somebody out there change me or help me? Please, like, is there, and what's amazing for me personally, this is exactly my experience. I had none of this language to put to it. I wouldn't have called it sin. I wouldn't have said I was a slave. As before I was a follower of Jesus, I would have just said, I don't know what to do to change me anymore. I read the self-help books. I talked to people. I tried to implement disciplines. I've done everything I know how to do, and I can't change some stuff in me. I'm still selfish. I'm still the same like guy down deep in here. Is there anybody that can alter me? Right? I wouldn't have said I need a savior. I wouldn't have called it sin. None of that. I would have just said, I need help. I need somebody to change me, right? In some way that I don't have access to. So the Bible's going to assume that we are in this scenario, and the Bible's going to assume that if you want salvation, if you're somebody that is saying, I want Jesus to save me, that you want this scenario to change. It's the idea. Right? So I want us to start there with that understanding that the Bible assumes that. And then I want us to look at these verses here in Romans chapter 6. And if you have a Bible, you can open up to that. Romans chapter 6. If you don't have a Bible and you want one, there's some underneath those chairs there. Let me walk you through a few of the verses. And Paul is in kind of this series of dialogues and arguments that he's kind of walking through. And here's what he says in Romans chapter 6, starting in verse 2. He says, we are those who have died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? He says, so don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Let me just pause here, right? Because he's kind of in the middle of breaking some stuff down for us that's really, really helpful for us to know. Here's what he's going to describe. A familiar story that we're going to probably recognize. We know that Jesus came to the planet, right? We believe that he lived a perfect life and he died an innocent death. And that he did that for a specific reason, that when Jesus came, that Jesus would come to defeat or to alter sin, to pay for sin. So all the stuff that you and I did, he changes places with us, and instead of us having to pay for that, he pays the way. Right? And then the Bible's going to say some other stuff. He's going to say that Jesus was buried, that he was buried, right? He was going to be in a tomb, and that Jesus would be resurrected, right? That he would rise from the dead, and that this reality, his death, his burial, his resurrection, this whole path that he walked, we know that this would all play out. We're familiar with it. You've got this happening at Easter, right? This whole thing. The thing that gets really, really profound is this. The Bible is going to tell us that when I say yes to Jesus, when I look at what he has done to beat sin, and I say, hey, I'm in on that, like we talked about last week, yes, I'm in, I want that. What happens is a series of things become true for me that were not true before. And some of those things are connected to the person of Christ. In fact, a bunch of things that are true of Jesus now become true of me. So he died, we're going to see this in a minute, he died to sin, died for sin. And when I say yes to Jesus, what happens is that reality of him breaking sin becomes personalized in my life. He's not just dying for the sin of humanity potentially, he's dying for me to break free of sin. That becomes realized and activated in my life and my experience. The power of sin is changed in my life. And this is where Paul's saying here in Romans, he says, hey, you were people that wanted to be rescued from this equation. And then he would say, don't you know that you have been set free, right? This thing has happened for you. It's changed. Why would you want to go back and be a slave again? The chain's been broken. When followers of Jesus look and say, I want to go enter back into sin on purpose and live there a bunch, it's like reshackling the chain together. It's kind of what Paul's saying. He goes into the next verse. Let me show it to you. It says, for we know that our old self was crucified with him, so that the body ruled by sin might be done away with, and that we should no longer be slaves to sin, because anyone who has died has been set free from sin. He's saying, hey, you died, you have been freed from sin. You say, Ryan, does that mean that we're perfect now? No. We've been in the habit of sinning for a long, long time, and probably that habit is going to continue to be difficult to break, right? So the power of sin is stripped and changed, And we're still going to struggle with it, and we're going to work at believing this for the rest of our lives until we see Jesus face to face. He says, not only were you set free from sin, but you were buried with him. Just like Jesus was buried, we were buried spiritually. And this is huge, the old me is gone. In a very real way, what happens to me is this me is altered and I am not that person anymore. Something has been changed in me. I'm not defined by my sin. I'm now defined by what Jesus has accomplished in my life. I am different. I am changed. I have been buried with Jesus. The old me is gone. To try to put some example to this, when I think about what Lori and I did when we got married, we stood in front of a group of people that we had one of those big weddings, right? And we got married pretty young. And what was happening when we stood there and pronounced our vows to one another? In a very real way, it's kind of like what we were doing is we were publicly announcing what we had already decided in our hearts. And we gathered a bunch of people in the room to say that to them so they could celebrate with us and so that they could acknowledge what was taking place. And in a very real way, it was almost like when I said, I'm marrying Lori, what I was doing is looking at every guy in the room who was my buddy, who was gathered there to support me and cheer me on, and look at the guys and say, hey guys, it's been fun, right? We had lots of time hanging out and lots of road trips, and we're still gonna be friends. And you need to understand that the single me is dead. I'm not single anymore. I'm married. This person that used to hang out and have unlimited time to do whatever we used to do, that guy's gone now. He's dead now. Now this is who I am, right? This is the new situation I'm going to find myself in, right? That's what I'd be announcing to all the guys. Right? And then to all the ladies, it's like I was looking at all the ladies, all the single ladies in the room and saying, ladies, you had your chance, right? It's over now. I'm off the table. I'm not this anymore. I'm that. When we look, right, this is what's happening. When I say yes to Jesus, I'm saying I'm not this anymore. That's not who I am. Look at what it says here. Again, right? For we know that our old self was crucified with him so the body of sin might be done away with. We should no longer be slaves of sin because anyone who's died has been set free from sin. Here's what we would say, right? Jesus died for sin so that we could die to sin. The story goes on. Here's what Romans 6 says in verse 4. We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death. The old me is gone. Look at this next passage here in Colossians. This is Colossians 3. Therefore, treat the parts of your earthly body as dead to sexual immorality, to impurity, to passion. Evil passions is the idea. Evil desire and greed, which amounts to idolatry. This is who I was. I'm now dead to that. And so in my heart and mind, just like when I said yes to marriage, I'm thinking any of those potential decisions I would have made to be with another woman, all of that is gone to me. I'm making a decision to erase those as potential decisions. These things that we're looking at, these are now gone. They're dead to me. They're erased. Right? Back to our passage here in Romans 6. Here's what he says. We were therefore buried with him through baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead to the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life. So my relationship with sin is changed. The old me is gone. Just like Jesus died, I died. Just like Jesus was buried, I was buried. Just like Jesus was resurrected, Now I am resurrected, and now the new me is here. What this means is, right, I'm not made new on the outside. That's going to happen one day when I pass, or when Jesus returns. He's going to change my body. That a resurrected body, that's going to happen in the future. But when somebody says yes to Jesus, what happens is on the inside, we are made new. We become something different. We are resurrected spiritually. I experienced this. When I said yes to Christ, slowly but surely, I started to realize that what I cared about and how I loved and how I had vision for the world, what I gave myself to began to change. Things that I never thought could change in my life began to change. Why? Because the Spirit of God lived in me, and I was living a new life, a life I could never generate on my own. I couldn't be a good enough person. I couldn't go to church enough. I couldn't fix it. I needed somebody to come and die for me, end me, and then bring me back up from the dead. That's how it works. At the core of our faith, we believe that new life comes through death. Jesus had to die and end something so that something new could be born. This is where we get the language of being born again, right? The new me is here. Because this message of what Jesus has done and how this has become true for me has become the core piece of what followers of Jesus have believed for the last 2,000 years. Right? Paul would say it this way in Romans 6:11. He says, in the same way, count yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. This is the good news. This is the good news. It's only good news for the person who's in this equation, for the person who says, I can't change me. I can't break this chain. How do I get out of this scenario? For that person, it's really fantastic news that what God decided to do, what he chose, was not to end me and not to condemn me and not to send me to hell, but he chose to invade this and make it possible for this chain to be broken in my life and me to become something more than just a slave, that I could become new and become a child of God, that I could join into the family. This is what Jesus was doing in my life. And followers of Jesus have been saying yes to this message for the last 2,000 years. People throughout the last centuries and people all over the globe have paid enormous costs to say yes to this message. Some people in some contexts, when they say yes to the gospel, the good news, what that looks like for them is as soon, and they know this, as soon as they say yes, it means they're ostracized from their families. That their family would look and say, I disown you because you've chosen Jesus. Some people, as soon as they say yes to Jesus, they're going to face martyrdom. They're going to literally die for this has happened throughout the last 2,000 years. Some people know when they say yes to Jesus. I felt this when I said yes to Christ. I knew I was going to be subjected to mockery and people were going to look at me different and think of me different because I was saying yes to Christ. You know that. If you are thinking about following Jesus, you know that some things are going to change if you say yes to Christ. And yet, this good news has continued to spread and to alter and to change lives over the last 2,000 years. For the person who's spiritually stuck, what I want to recognize is what we're talking about when we're talking about faith, when we're talking about the reality of what's happening spiritually, is we're not just talking about going to church and playing church because my mom told me I had to come to something. I go to Sunday school and I just sit somewhere and do a thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a social norm or a political thing. None of that stuff is relevant to this conversation. God is looking at you as an individual and saying, I want to break you out of this situation. I came for you. That's what Jesus did for me. I want to save you, rescue you, and I want you to be included in the family. See, this is where this starts to get kind of crazy. This story, let me walk you over here into the baptismal for a moment. Here's our symbol, okay? Here's our symbol. When somebody kneels in this little tub, or a river, or a pool, or an ocean, right? Wherever they're getting baptized, when somebody goes down into the water, what that picture is symbolizing is it's the picture of somebody saying, I believe that I am no longer who I was. I'm no longer a slave to sin. I believe Jesus beat the power of sin in my life, and I'm dying to it. When somebody's under the water, the idea is that we try to get people completely immersed down into the water because that picture symbolizes the reality that every part of me has been altered. There's nothing untouched in this transformation. That shame, that ugly, that disgusting act, that horrible thought, dead, buried. I now am not that anymore. That has been done away with because of what Jesus has done. When he died on the cross and he was buried, I was buried with him. When we come up out of the water, it symbolizes the power of a new life. That now I am something new on the inside. I'm not just a little bit better version of me. I'm not a self-improved version. I have been made something different. That is what's being pictured in baptism. It's not just, is an act of obedience? Sure it is. Should we? Yeah, we should do it, sure. The water doesn't save me. It's just a symbol. It's a picture, right? Just like my wedding ring. If I take my wedding ring off right now, it does not mean I'm not married. If my 11-year-old daughter goes and grabs a wedding ring and puts it on, it doesn't mean that she's married, which is good because she won't be married till she's 35, right? The ring has got to be attached to the meaning. The picture has to be attached to the truth. And when it is, man, it gets super powerful. Super powerful. That's why baptism has become so powerful in my life and my experience because, man, now I see the truth, the reality of what God has done. Now, as I know that there's some of us here for sure today that would look and say, Ryan, I don't think I knew this. Like, I did not get that this is what was going on. And you're investigating your faith, trying to figure out what you believe. And what I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to pray. And if you want to make the decision for this to become true of you, that if you want to say this yes, that offer is on the table today. And it's simply just a decision. Just like I made a decision to say, I'm in to spend the rest of my life with Lori, we make a decision to say, I'm in. I want to spend the rest of my life and my eternity with you, Jesus. You're it for me. There's no other way. I don't believe I'm good enough to save myself. I don't believe enough church will save me. I don't believe there's another religion that can save me. I believe this, right? If you want to make that decision today and become a follower of Jesus, that decision is completely in your court to make, right? And when I pray, if you want to make that decision today, you can. I would invite you to do that. I would love for you to do that. And then what I would love to invite you to do is this. If you want to, you can walk up here with your clothes on and talk to me in this front row, and I will baptize you in that water. Like, Ryan, it's 10 degrees out. Pastor Aaron has already offered to go get your car and pull it in from the parking lot. We're going to pick you up. If you walked here, we'll drive you home. If you would look and say, I'm stuck. Ryan, I'm stuck. I need to be changed. I want you to know that you can change. But you cannot do it alone. You got to let Jesus do it. And he's already done it. All you got to do, he's done all the heavy lifting. All you got to do is say yes. Okay? Now, you may be in that situation where you're saying yes to Jesus for the first time, right? And you're going to be baptized as a direct first response to that new faith. Awesome. You might be here and you're like, Ryan, I got baptized a long time ago because somebody said you should do that. None of that decision had anything to do with what you just talked about. Now that we just walked it through, I get it. Man, I think I might need to be baptized, like for real. That if you want to take that step and be baptized as a response to your faith, not your parents' faith, not you got baptized when you were 4 and you had no idea what was happening, and right, you want to make the decision to say, I'm with him. I want to make a public declaration that this is what defines my life, that this is the person that I'm with. You can make that decision today. Right? If you've never been baptized and you're a follower of Jesus, you can walk right up here and do it. I'll be hanging up here in this row right here. You come up here and talk to me. I'll ask you a few questions about your faith in Jesus, and then if you want me to baptize you today or somebody else in the room to baptize you, then we'll do that. Guys, here's the thing. This is the decision in your lap, okay? It's your pressure. It's what do you want to do with it? Do you want to move? Do you want to grab hold of the reality of where you are? In this new place, in a new year, with maybe a new faith, do you want this to be the before and after moment in your life where you get unstuck? If you want it to be that, it could be that. Right? I'm going to pray. I'm going to have the band come out. We're going to sing this song. And guys, all during the music, if you want to come up here and make that decision, you can. Right? Would you bow your heads, close your eyes with me? We'll pray together. Father, I want to come to you now, and Lord, I remember what it was like to say yes to you for the first time. And Lord, as I know there's friends here today that are considering that decision, God, I want to confess what I confessed that very first day. Lord, that I need you, that I can't save myself, that I have sinned and I have no way out of this bondage, this chain that I'm bound by, that I need you, Christ, to save me from it. And I believe there's no other way, that you're it. That, Jesus, you are my Savior, that you died for my sin, and you've made me new. on the inside. Lord, I received that message, and we want to receive that message today. To become followers of you, Christ. God, for each and every one of us, Lord, would you help us to be struck by the profound reality of what you have done for us. Lord, it's your idea, all of it, to move towards us in our shame, in our disgrace, even in our filth at times. Lord, you know all that we've said and done and seen. You know everywhere we've been. And yet you have chosen to forgive, to offer relationship, and to move toward you as you have moved towards us. Lord, today give us courage to say yes in a way that we've never said yes before. Meet us here, Lord, even now.